What's up, everyone, and welcome to Clear Talk. It is fire pit time again. In this video, what we're going to be talking about, in light of yesterday's video where I talked about Zionism and Israel and like how the conditions in Israel ultimately, have reached when you let Zionism, when you let colonialism, settler mentality go completely unfettered, unchecked, unbound, that it ultimately leads to where we are with Israel right now, and the conditions is inevitable end. We can't and go check that out if you have not checked that out. We can't disregard the man that is in power in Israel, and that is Netanyahu, and the influence that he has, how much influence he has had on the condition of Israel at this moment, and why it has reached that inevitable conclusion. So this is it's because Netanyahu's influence in the Zionist movement, in where Israel stands right now, and then in light of the fact that he, also has deep connections here in the United States, and why it is so easy for him to come here comfortably, as he acts like he is in no fear of being in the United States, even though he has been found to be a complete criminal of war, war crimes and crimes against humanity by the ICC, and a warrant for his arrest, and which demands that any member of the ICC should conclude that warrant in arresting him. Why he feels so free here in the United States. So we're going to talk about all this. So thank you very much for joining me here. If you are new to the channel, welcome. If you would like to check out more from the channel, please do so. There's links in the description for this channel and all my other channels. Check them out as well. If you like what you see, consider subscribing, like, share, comment, all that good stuff, because that helps get more videos in front of more people. And if you would like to go further, there's Patreon link there as well. $2 a month. You support any of the channels that you would like to help grow those channels, help grow Patreon and grow JMD Nation. And if you want, there's also a merch link there as well. I have merch for every single channel. If you would like to check that out, see if you like any of that, please get it. That would be amazing. If you're a Patreon member, you get discount on that merch, so even more reason to become a Patreon member. But either way, any support you do decide to give is very much appreciated. I thank you very much. And if you're returning, you're freaking amazing. You are amazing. Keep coming back, because you're what makes JMD Nation. Okay, so again, like I said, yesterday we talked about the Zionism, colonism, settler mentality, all that stuff, and how it is accumulated at this point to where Israel stands, which with an entirety of a state at this point, just enthralled in anger and in violence towards all their neighbor, or towards anybody that they feel is in opposition to them, and feeling like they are impugned to do whatever they want to. This mentality that they nobody can touch them, and that even exudes from the borders of Israel and anywhere else that they decide to vacation, and they take over areas, and or for even those that are more liberal, and secular, and against this Netanyahu's government, still go and settle in other places. Sometimes, and the one thing I did not agree with, and I don't think I even fully explained that, was that I don't feel like all of those move into areas still with that settler mentality. I do think that they are more prone to actually filter into society a little bit better, but there are still some that it evidently are still trying to make the 2.0 Israel, and make another state, take land, or assume land rather, not take it, the more diplomatic way of trying to still create a Jewish state. But either way, we talked about all that yesterday. But at the core of why the current condition of Israel, the anger, the frustration, and what has been propagated in that state, very much so, is connected to Netanyahu. Netanyahu has been working for decades, to make the current condition of Israel that exact condition. And we're talking about a guy who, yes, was born in Tel Aviv, but spent most of his life, or at least the most of his primitive young years of his life, and even education, here in the United States. All right. From like the age of 7 to 18, he was living in Philadelphia. Okay, he grew up as a typical American childhood. All right, until he went then to work, be a part of the IDF for a few years, where there's some weird things around how he ultimately left the IDF. Or was because he was in some battles. The story is the way he wants to play it is that he was a brave soldier, and that he undertook a major injury. He was and then was dismissed, but it was like an injury of bravery, right? But when you really dig down into it, it actually was that he took an accidental shot to like the arm or something from one of his own, friendly fire, one of his own servicemen, and then left. He was sent from there. It kind of ended his career in the IDF. Then he, comes back to the United States, goes through all this education, teaching himself architecture and business degrees and I think some political science stuff or something to that degree. Getting an education here in his early 20s in the United States, again, living comfortably here, and then he gets in this bout of back and forth things between the United States and Israel. He becomes an ambassador for Israel to the UN, and this is where he starts to actually develop, and throughout his late 20s, early 30s, starting into his political career, and really starts to push the Zionist mentality that he had developed at that point, and creating his narrative around terrorism very strongly, to create, and ultimately the condition and the thought of turning the whole narrative around between the fight between Palestine and Israel, to criminalize all Palestinians, turning them into terrorists, and creating this condition where it is impossible for anybody, or at least for him, for anybody to consider Palestinians worthy of their own state, or worthy of their own where he starts to dehumanize them in the condition that we sit right now with Israel. This is all the makings of Netanyahu. He's been doing this for decades. So he because before like 9/11, before terrorism became, in this fight against quote-unquote terrorism, terrorism wasn't even considered as it is today. The idea of suicide bombers, or people that are militant in taking over a state or the world or whatever, that was not even really what defined terrorism. Terrorism was a little bit more of just it was a more lax term, kind of a weaker term around more like just acquiring things. I mean, if the previous condition of terrorism, I mean, you could look at almost any part in history where somebody, aggressively, violently acquired any kind of land could be considered terrorism. It was, that's the way it was. But Netanyahu actually was one of the first ones and one of the core ones that really started to change the meaning and the perception of terrorism, and really sculpting it around identifying it to groups of people that are wanting to, bring quote unquote, violence and destruction to a state or another group of people. And he was really what cultivated this, and what ultimately, was, I would say, influenced the United States, especially around 9/11, because Netanyahu, there's video after video after video after video of Netanyahu in the early 90s in the U.S. Congress, speaking to Congress or at the UN, constantly spewing terrorism, and it's attached to Palestine, it's attached to Iran, it's attached to oh, they're right on the verge of getting nuclear weapons, or only weeks away, blah 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 blah. I mean, this has been his narrative and his push to constantly repeat these things over and over and over and over and over again, to ingrain the connection of terrorism to what he defines as terrorism, and that has influenced the U.S. and the way people envision terrorism, and the way people think of terrorism, and the way people have identified that to certain groups of people. And this has all been Netanyahu that's done this. He is quite literally the accumulate of the most evil that you could think of. Quite literally, I do not mean this in any kind of like flamboyant way. He is quite literally our modern day Hitler, with no doubt. And the more I talk here, you will see. Okay, he has. I mean, we're talking about a guy that ultimately, in the early 2000s, became, he moved his way up into, after dealing with his, like, the UN ambassador thing. He then comes back to Israel. He winds up becoming the head of the Likud party. At that point, you had Labin as the PM of Israel, and this is in the mid to late 90s, where he was actually, even though the Parliament of Israel has overwhelmingly been like right or far right, especially in comparison to even the United States, right to far right in the majority of its parliament. The makeup of the Israeli parliament that to any degree has ever been positive for Palestinians, positive for a two-state solution or for peace or whatever, has been a very small fraction of their parliament. Like, literally, you could count on your hands how many people have been a part of that coalition, or a part of a party that has that idea. Everybody else, the other 100 and something members of the parliament, have all been, are very right, or right, considered right, center right, to like far ass extreme right, like the Glantz and Smotrich, that are like just kill every fucking body, right? That's just like their mentality. Like, it's just violence. Lindsey Graham on fucking crack or something. Like, they're absolutely repulsive, and yet they are, we're talking about defense ministers and war cabinet members in Israel. This is what we're talking about. This is what the makeup of Israel's parliament is. He takes over the Likud party, which is a relatively centrist party, center-right party. Not really as extreme as some of the others, but nevertheless, he takes over that part of the party, and he works his way up into being, after, well, let me back up. Was it Labin, who was the prime minister at that time? He was a little bit more of the peacemaking kind. He was the one that tried to create the accord. I can't remember the name of it, but the kind of a peace treaty of sorts between him and the PLO at the time, to try to eventually work towards a two-state solution. This was alongside, they signed this agreement with Bill Clinton at the helm of that. So that, you know, we're talking about the early mid-90s there for that. He was really a more progressive figurehead for Israel. Now, he was really trying to push in that moment to bring peace to Palestine and Israel, even if the agreement didn't necessarily guarantee anything for them, and there was probably still going to be a lot of control. It was still more of working in the direction of peace, and it upset a lot of right people in Israel, that, you know, especially settlers and people who wanted to take land, the more extreme Zionist versions of Zionism, from actual regular people to people within the government, and this even upset Palestinians to some degree. Those that thought that it was not really going far enough, and that they were still going to be under control of Israel like they had been, and that was upsetting to them. That created a lot of skirmishes that happened in that time between Palestinians and Israelis. And this ultimately started to bring about a negative figure to Lebin at the time, and he, which helped Netanyahu, because Netanyahu was out there, you know, like feeding all this propaganda of terrorism, and how, you know, we've got to get extreme against this. We can't have a new two-state solution. We can't, you know, that he's too weak, and blah 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 blah. The strong man, you know, figurehead, and ultimately, all of this anger that built up lends to Lebin being assassinated, and then ultimately, eventually, after a few months or so, or a year or so of some people not really like gaining PM but not really doing anything, and it wound up bouncing around, you ultimately get Netanyahu in power. And he gets in power for 3 years. But in that moment, those 3 years, even though he had all this rhetoric of extremism and you know, doing all these things, ripping up that peace agreement, and or that was what he said he was going to do, and he ultimately didn't even do that. He actually, through that time, seemed a little bit more peaceful and was working along with the PLO. It was very odd for people in Israel, because they were like, wait a minute, you said you were going to be all like hardlined and aggressive, and you know, you were talking all this shit, but then you don't really do that. And I believe that was because of the pressure of the United States, because Bill Clinton was still president at that time as well. That was at the end of Bill Clinton's terms, and we're talking about, I think he just ultimately was dealing with that pressure, or maybe this is the early Bush terms. Either way, United States was probably pressuring him to do more of that peace agreement. So then they kick him out, put somebody else in, who is PM for a few years, which turns out to have eventually have extreme connections to Epstein and the Epstein class, part of one of the main conspirators apparently in the Epstein files. This has become huge, but he loses, not because of the Epstein files, but he, you know, ultimately loses his power, and they go through a few more changes real quick, like before Netanyahu ultimately becomes back into power. And this is and this time this is when he starts to get a little bit more hardline. He starts to get and starts to work in the whole foundation that we currently see right now. The attitude towards the bringing the terrorism state or conditioned appearance to the Palestinian people and all this, because this is after, once Hamas has then gained control, which again Netanyahu helped promote Hamas, because Hamas came up as a resilient group, militant group in Gaza to fight back against Israel, because the PLO was not doing anything to protect Gazans. And so you had an internal militant, militia group that gained strength with the people of Gaza as the only deterrent, the only defense that they had against Israeli aggression, which they were continuously doing. And when they came into power, in order, you wind up at some point having, the in the late 2000s, you wind up having Gaza and the West Bank. There was elections. Oh, shoot, my mind was starting to blank. Elections and stuff that were trying to happen and who was going to take ultimate power of the Palestinian people. And you had the PLO trying to push for taking over. You had Hamas that was pushing because they didn't believe the PLO was strong enough. They looked at them as too weak, and so ultimately Netanyahu backed Hamas and was trying to promote for Hamas to take control of Gaza. And this was all in his plans. This was because he saw Hamas as a figurehead to prevent the two-head state. Because as long as he could keep the Palestinian people divided, as long as he could keep some sort of militant group in Gaza that he could blame for everything and say that they were terrorists, that he, that benefited him. It benefited his power, benefited his narrative. So he promoted Hamas to maintain their power in Gaza, which they ultimately did. And he was continuing to promote this over and over and over again, all throughout the 2010s, throughout his other terms as power, in power, and that worked perfectly for him. Worked perfectly for the narrative, creating them as terrorists, creating and continuously pushing their connection to Iran and connecting Iran as terrorists. And selling that to Washington, selling that to the entire world. This is what Netanyahu does. It's what he has done. He has completely resculpted the whole idea and meaning of terrorism, and placed it on certain people that he just distastes and hates, and wants to, quite frankly, and himself eradicate, along with a lot of other people with the same feelings in Israel, so that they can maintain control and ultimately create that greater Israel that Zionists yearn to have. This is what has happened, but that did not go without issues, because eventually Netanyahu found himself in a lot of legal issues in Israel. There would have been like 3 major cases against him for fraud and collusion between like different newspapers and money handling and other things, which he has been under investigation and had trials since like 22 to now, that he has, because of these wars, continued to elude himself from any kind of actual, from any actual conviction. And that's the reason why I've argued this multiple times. He continues and will continue to push for war, to push to attack, to push for conditions that prevent him from having to actually meet these convictions. People, there's an overwhelming sentiment in Israel, okay, that Netanyahu is not liked. He is not liked by the people. The majority of Israelis do not like Netanyahu. They want him out of power. The majority of even his own party do not like him and want him out of power. But they see ultimately that within any kind of moment when the country is directly involved in some sort of militant action, is not the ideal moment to kick somebody out of power and put somebody else in. There's this sentiment that which has been driven by Netanyahu to that a leader needs to stay in power, in the middle of some sort of a militant operation, okay, and that could cause issues with that operation, or could cause it to be a failed operation if you are, if the one that is the head of the military, which would be him, very similar to like Trump being the head of our military, and directing military actions, that if you are disrupting that by having him in trials and being convicted, then you're going to create a condition where those operations will fail. It's the same thing that, Trump, we've heard Trump spew this because he's learned from Netanyahu, that, potentially, if we're in some sort of an, the same thing could happen here. If we're in some sort of a battle or some sort of a, military operation, then we might need to suspend elections, blah, 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 blah. This is the same rhetoric we've heard from Trump, because again, he learned it from Netanyahu. He sees the advantages of that. And there's a lot of things from Netanyahu that I see more and more that Trump has learned, and things that Trump is doing directly tie back to conditions and things that Netanyahu has said and done. It is quite wild. So yes, Netanyahu is skirting from actual legal ramifications of his own doings in Israel. He is hated in Israel by its people, by the government itself, but they are in a rock and hard place kind of situation because they continue to be in military actions. And again, that brings weird, it enables him to continue to push the trials along, to push them back. And appeal and appeal and appeal and appeal and appeal and appeal to infinitum, quite frankly. The last time, because this is technically, I think, the third or fourth time that he has actually been in rule, because he had a short stint where he was kicked out because of those fraud stuff. He lost power, and the government could not agree on who to put in PM and how to go forward without him, so he wound up ultimately getting right back in power within months later. And ever since he got back this last time, initially he attempted to try to solidify that he could not be removed from power again. He tried through legal means to make it to where all of his legal stuff would go away and that he would not be able to be replaced. But ultimately, by trying to create a condition where their Supreme Court, and understand that the Israel government is not quite like the United States. They do not have a constitution, okay? They've never established a constitution, and the only figurehead or agency that has any means of pushing back against the government is their Supreme Court. And if you can somehow delegitimize the Supreme Court, then the government or those in power can then go completely unscathed with whatever they want to do. That's the only check and balance, is the Supreme Court in Israel. And so that was his attempt to try to delegitimize the Supreme Court there, to try to create an issue where the Supreme Court could no longer have any power over the government, but the Supreme Court ultimately pushed back on a very thin margin, 8-7 ruling, ruled against the government's actions, and ultimately prevented that condition from happening. So, you know, we've already had the instance where Netanyahu has tried to become an authoritarian dictator for Israel in order to skirt his legal issues and maintain power there. And this is the man we're talking about, okay? And talking about all of this, and he has led the country into a max exodus of people who do not like the government, who see the democracy, the quote-unquote democracy, if it ever was one, completely being deleted, damaged, beyond repair. And they have left to in protest against, you know, there is, I mean, we're talking about things that there have been massive protests in Israel for years over Netanyahu and his rule and power. Constant pushback. I mean, literally, these people hate him. And he's continued to create these conditions where the IDF, we've seen what has happened ever since October 7th. And yes, the atrocity of October 7th were horrendous, should not have happened. Again, there's evidence that Netanyahu allowed that to happen, that he knew, he was already warned that there was an operation that was going to happen, and he, instead of acting on that and trying to prevent it, he actually coincidentally pulled a lot of the security from the Gaza Strip area to the West Bank to manage settlement stuff that was happening over there, and trying to assist settlers in all their violence, and taking of land, annexations of land. Coincidentally, at the time that it was already thought that there was something going to happen, and that Hamas and other militant groups were going to do some sort of major operation, and then that happened. So this is all created. Netanyahu has created a condition where he has promoted Hamas to power, to stay and maintain that power, created them as terrorists, as the ultimate enemy in Gaza, that threatens all the lives of Israelis, and that we have to, constantly, do our operations there to try to maintain them. And then after October 7th, of course, we've seen the genocide happen ever since. Complete obliteration. 80-something thousand people now confirmed dead, although we know that it's way higher than that. The Gaza Strip, 80-something% of buildings completely destroyed. Of those 80-something thousand people that have died, around 80%, 83% or so were civilians. They weren't even militants. Okay, 20-something thousand of those were children. Okay, and even to this day, okay, they are continuing to drop bombs, do air raid attacks on tents, killing children daily. Okay, this is no joke. Even as of yesterday, they did I think 1 or 2 attacks that killed multiple children. All right, I'm talking about, there's pictures of the children just dead, bloody mess on the streets. It is revolting. Okay, and this is what the condition that Netanyahu has created. This is the Israel that Netanyahu has influenced and lifted to its current condition, and aided in that. One of the biggest influences, if not the single-handed biggest influence, of where Israel stands today. Because if if he did not push back, if the conditions of Lebanon back in the mid 90s, if he were to have been allowed to continue into power, and those that peace agreement could have seen, we could have seen where that eventually would have led. I mean, we could have actually at this point maybe had some sort of peace between Palestine and Israel, because I mean the sentiment back in the 90s towards the Palestinian people and towards the Palestine having its own state was way higher. Like the majority of Israelis actually agreed that Palestinians should have their own state. That was in the 90s. Now it's complete reverse. The majority of Israelis actually are against the Palestinian state now. And that has all been cultivated by Netanyahu coming into power and holding that power now for the past couple of decades. A little over a decade. This is all of his making. He is quite literally, again, the modern day Hitler. And we are allowing him to come to the United States. He just Wednesday was on his eighth trip. Okay, eighth appearance, just this term of Trump's. Okay, this is the most he has ever visited the United States under any presidential term. 8 times so far under President Trump's second term. Okay, just a little bit, about a year and a half. He has been here 8 times to speak to the president, to speak to Congress, to do all his little campaign podcast stuff, his interviews with different publications and stuff. This man is allowed to come to the United States and speak to our president, to speak to our Congress, to speak and do all these interviews and these podcasts and propagate all his lies, fueling dissent within America as much as he possibly can, trying to defend Israel and their actions. And it is absolutely repulsive. It's absolutely repulsive that we are allowing him to come here and do all of this and not arresting him. That's the reason why I completely back Mom Donnie in New York, stating that if he appears in September for the UN Council there, that he is looking into, all of the legal opportunities or legal lanes that he could, go in actually arresting Netanyahu. Now, would it actually stand? Would would he be arrested even if they could actually legally arrest him? Which there's very good evidence to prove that they actually could, under U.S. law, arrest Netanyahu. Even as a local mayor could arrest Netanyahu. But would it actually, would he be in jail for more than 24 hours? Or more than likely not. He might not even see jail. He would very much probably just be released within an hour or so. But nevertheless, it would create this stance that, yes, there are people in the United States, there are even leadership in the United States that is actually willing to uphold international law and uphold criminal court warrants and conviction indictments on a leader for war crimes. That we are not everybody in the United States is willing to, just like a lot of members of Washington that are completely sold and bought by Israel. Okay, from the president down through almost every Republican senator and a House of Representative, at least half of Democrats, okay, in the House and Senate. all of the AIPAC money that is flooded into everything, Israeli lobbying, and networks like Fox News that continuously, almost on a daily basis, platform Israeli propaganda through Mark Levin, through Netanyahu, and through multiple other. All of their reports about this war are constantly through one journalist who is out of Tel Aviv. We were talking about a constant Israeli propaganda news feed directly through Fox News. Fox News might as well be Israeli news, because that's all it is. They are complete Israeli propaganda at this point, feeding the Republican base with all these lies on a daily basis. It is absolutely ridiculous. To the point that you had somebody like Hannity, one of the major journalists, quote unquote commentator at this point on Fox News, at Senator Lindsey Graham's funeral, giving this most ridiculous speech at Senator Graham's funeral that looked more like just a complete kiss ass to Donald Trump. Talking about how Senator Graham would, is probably has this luxury golden mansion in heaven, probably with a golden ballroom and all these, because he loved his dear friend Trump. The man that Senator Graham just 30 seconds ago, before Trump became president, was completely talking shit about him and talking about how he was a con man and how he was going to destroy the Republican Party and the country. What? Come on. Are you kidding me? Hannity is absolutely pathetic, and talking about how much he loved Israel. Trump even talking about how much Senator Graham was a warmonger. And he makes jokes of it lightly, but yeah, he's not a war he didn't love. But that was what made him so great. What the hell? This is what we have now. We have people like that on Fox News, along with all of the, the Levins, the Tel Aviv directives about the war. All in Fox News, complete Israeli propaganda. And then we have the ability for Netanyahu, a complete war criminal, is able to come to the United States, spew all his lies to all of our, all of these different podcast and media things, talking shit about, again, Mom Donnie, just because Mom Donnie is arguing that he is looking into upholding actual international law. He actually is concerned with women and children and innocent civilians being blown to smithereens, to being killed and carpet bombed now for over 3 years. A complete genocide and obliteration of a group of people. What are we talking about here? He just wants to uphold law. He wants Netanyahu to actually have to address these crimes, or potential crimes, if you will. Okay, and that makes him what, a terrorist? That's what that makes him? An anti-Semite? And a terrorist? Please, come on. We're talking about a man, again, that is absolutely hated in his own country. Okay? He's quite literally hated by the majority of the people of his country and the majority of the government of his country, but they are in a rock and a hard place and can't get rid of him at the moment. What are we talking about here? But yet he is opened with arms wide open, welcomed here in the United States, as if he is the biggest friend and greatest ally of the United States. We are quite literally platforming and protecting and defending one of the biggest military government uh, uh, genocidal figureheads and leaders since Adolf Hitler, and we are protecting them and giving him sanctioned domain here, giving him or sanctuary domain here rather. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. We as a country, seriously, or as our government, it needs to be like literally clean swept. I mean, the impact that Israel has in our government at this point, the impact that Netanyahu has in our government, is destructive for the United States. And I mean, while we are having Congress people quite literally trying to pass stuff to merge our military, to merge our intelligence with Israel, a state without a constitution, a state with, only check and balance is their Supreme Court, and even it is on the balance, on thin ice. A state that can't seem to remove a war criminal, even though more than likely they would just put somebody else in place that would be just as bad, if not worse. Let's be real. But we're talking about a state that is quite literally rogue and out of control. Their mentality, their settler, colonialist, narcissistic, ego, impunitive like opinions of their, sorry, I had an ant crawling on me. Idea around their existence in the world, and that they should not be touched. We want to join with that. We want to allow. I mean, we're trying to, and at the same time trying to criminalize dissent in this country, trying to criminalize protests, trying to criminalize free speech in this country, which clearly in Israel is not allowed. We are going down a very horrific path, and the influence and condition, the ideology that has consumed Washington, has consumed a lot of our leadership, has consumed a lot of our congressmen, has consumed a lot of our citizenry, even though there has been a complete flop on favorability and approval of Israel. Still, there is a lot, there is a minority, but yet still decent chunk of people that have been influenced and conditioned to trust and believe in and defend and protect a nation like Israel, that has been influenced by the likes of Netanyahu, and the condition that he has brought, that he has single-handedly crafted for decades now. You need to know. You need to know who these people are. If you don't, and don't just believe me, go search it, go research it, go look it up. You've got to know who these people are and what they have influenced, what they have cultivated, why people feel the way they feel, why people have the mentality that they do in Israel. Why are certain people hated over others? Especially after, at one time, there was a movement and sentiment in actually finding peace. You can see the parallels. You can see the parallels in what has happened in Israel and what is currently happening in the United States. The regressive nature of leadership. They're not separate. They're not separate. They're very much intertwined. And this has been a condition that has been working now and cultivating for the past decade or two. And Netanyahu is at the forefront of that. So, it should not be taken lightly that this man has such free reign in our country. Everybody needs to be questioning that. Why Israeli lobbying and Israeli influence is so free in our country, while we try to criminalize and label as terrorism for the supposed Russia or China or whoever else label we want to put in, tampering with elections or tampering with intelligence or tampering with whatever. But Israel, for some reason, has a completely free reign. Netanyahu has complete free reign in influencing wherever he can, wherever he wants to. Thank you very much for joining me. Let me know what you think. And until next time, peace, clear talk, I'm out.